What's the delay usually? Hello? You can hear me? Live? What's the delay usually? Okay. Perfecto. Okay, so welcome to Alecato show. My name is Alecato. I just finished work. I was watching a really interesting video that I thought, hey, maybe you guys want to watch it too. We're gonna watch a münecat video on body language. She debunked body language experts on YouTube. She makes really good content, so I just wanted to watch it. But I didn't want to watch it alone. So why don't you accompany me tonight? How about that? Okay, well, so let's go do this. Well, I guess I can. Okay, I'll put the chat here. I'll put myself here. This there. Okay, so accompany me. Let's watch it. I'm eating too, so I'll try to not make too much noise.
By Ren. Hello, I'm Butch Dieselsteak, and now I'm a newsreader. The YouTuber münecat is involved in a scandal wherein her two cats have called the police after alleged repeated incidents of her pulling the skin back on their faces until they look like rabid ferrets and taking pictures for her own.
Sorry, 1 second. Okay, let's continue.
Sick entertainment value. This has led to them calling the police for repeated feline rights violations. And because this is a high interest, ongoing news event on a 24-hour news channel, we've repeated everything we know about the case 47 times. So give a warm welcome to our body language expert. Talk. Say words. Well, as we can see from this footage, münecat is showing
really
signs of disgust, and you can actually tell this from the crinkle in her forehead, possibly because the press have been outside her home all day. But I'll let your
The reason I wanted to do this video
also,
is because I've been really interested in on like graphology and things like that. I guess people claim that they can read certain personality trait, body language. I remember watching the Mentalist. No, the Mentalist. Is it the Mentalist? No. Well, he's kind of the Mentalist and Lie to Me. I think those are the two shows I watched where they do like body language stuff, and then there's like, oh, they solve crimes through body language, things like that. So, and I've been doing some research on this. It's apparently too graphology is a thing. I didn't know that about graphology, where you can tell the personality of people based on their handwriting, which is kind of weird, but hey, I don't know. You tell me. Do you believe in that stuff? 'Cause I don't.
Increasing her intake of beer to cope, but would you look at that? Who pours their beer like that? Now that can be a sign of sociopathy. You know how the saying goes, that's why her beer head is so big. It's full of secrets. You see, body language is not an exact science, but it is backed up by my personal opinion and empirically proven pseudoscience. Over to our weather correspondent while I go and jump off a cliff. Body language experts. They've
Not expecting that.
annoyed me for some time.
He's been up in space, but who cares? Because he appeared with bare feet. That's all anybody's talking about.
It's his feet, Judy, not his cock. They're like astrologists for people who think that they're too clever to believe in something not backed up by empirical evidence, but at least astrologists don't say they're backed up by empirical evidence. They just try and backwards analyze your life by applying it to the arbitrary movements of planets millions of miles away. So in this video, I'm going to be questioning whether there is actually any peer-reviewed consensus behind body language science. Did Hitler have cock-shamed?
I'm also making a video about body language and graphology, so this is good research for me. So it works both ways.
Does Noel Gallagher have cock confidence? Why is your girl's pussy facing the world instead of facing her man? What does it mean if the triangle is green? It means some shit is about to get debunked.
Really? That's the thing?
Cat, these body language people are on TV all the time, so surely it must be a real science.
There are 0 peer-reviewed studies proving the existence of Noel Edmonds, but just because he's on TV, do you believe he's real? No, I didn't think so. So there's no reason to automatically believe in body language experts because they're talking like they know their shit. They pop up on the news.
Confidence is all about confidence. If you can tell somebody something with confidence, 9 times out of 10 they'll believe you. Especially if you portray yourself as an expert. It's the expert bias, I think it's called. Where just because somebody has certain education or certain things, they're more likely to be believed. Same with astrology. Same with tarot reading. You can say it confidently, people will believe you, and they'll have their own little confirmation bias to help them fill up the gaps and believe the bigger picture.
Infecting tabloid newspapers, they create insufferable daytime TV segments all over the world, and now they're all over the only website on the internet, youtube.com. They exist mainly to provide a circle jerk of confirmation bias to anyone who watches them, as the analyses they give are often so vague you could attribute whatever meaning you want to whatever bodily spasm you wish, creating whichever narrative that most pleases your semi-comatose audience.
Chantel's micro-expression here could reveal she was possibly lying about giving a 5-finger slippy reach around to Das under the sheets on Love Island this year.
You know what? I fucking knew it. Fucking bitch. They allow us to wallow in our own gratification about being right about someone we previously thought might have been deceptive, and to tell ourselves that our instincts are so fine-tuned that they're actually backed up by science, mainly so we can pass judgment on celebrities who achieve things while we sit on the sofa, our brains slowly turning
Crazy.
into a mushy paste. It's like wanking to
This is so
extremely
true.
shameful porn, but for your ego rather than your libido.
Hey!
These experts will qualify that this isn't an exact science and that you can't rely on any single cue to detect deception, but you must rather observe clusters of cues to deception, which allows them to weave any narrative they like in and out of whichever cues they choose to draw attention to, whilst leaving enough room for reasonable doubt just in case they turn out to be wrong. Or they'll watch retrospective cases in which they already know the outcome of an event and then sit there postulating about how they would have seen the warning signs. And you too could avoid having your body dismembered and disposed of in 12 separate wheelie bins by spotting the twitch in a psychopath's eye if you read my book or book a place on my fucking course 997 down
They always
from
sell courses.
1997 today.
They always sell
Ooh,
courses.
Today only. Look, the clock is ticking. You better sign up fast.
Spotting facial emotions is critical to understand people's behavior and their attitudes to you, because you want to know if they are being sincere or maybe don't have the best intentions in mind. And that's why I created my complete guide to facial expressions.
I've always felt that people talk about psychopaths very far removed, don't really even understand what exactly a psychopath is or how they act or what their body language is or anything. The whole idea in this video is to pull all the evidence together so you can easily see their psychopathic body language, behavior, and tendencies so you can more easily identify a psychopath in your own life. Now in the comments, what famous person do you think is a psychopath?
I'm going to leave a link to the video that I made about ways to avoid gaslighting and manipulation, the tools that gaslighters use and how you can counter those tools. Very important stuff, all in the description.
It's crazy that they'll sell you this idea that if you see the videos, if you buy the course, if you read the book, you're going to become an expert. When in reality, like, body language is very, like, from what I remember watching Lie to Me, a TV show, which I don't know how scientifically accurate it is, but even the guy used to say, like, their micro expressions are what tells the truth, not body language itself. And I think it will require years and years and years of practice and actual, deployment of certain of those skills of observation to really be able to be even a little bit good at body language reading. But all these people say, oh, just read my book, do my 8-month course, and you'll be an expert too. Like, That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Why does it keep doing that? Hold on, let me close some stuff. Okay. Let's try this again.
Love it.
Body language experts are the modern equivalent
I don't know why it keeps freezing.
of medieval lie detection techniques or trials by ordeal that conveniently never left much room for the accused liar to be completely exonerated from their supposed insincerity, but left plenty of room for the accuser to decide, based on an inclination, whether they were guilty or innocent. Going all the way back to 1000 BC in ancient China, those suspected of deception were made to chew raw rice or pasta if the food came out as dry as a menopausal nun's tampon. Ew. The accused was, of course, a liar. But if they spat out a full-on bolognese with meatballs, they were truthful. But this was rare. In the 19th century, phrenology was believed to be an indicator of whether a person was a liar or not. The founder of skull science, Franz Joseph Gall, had the gall to go around shaving people's heads and then postulated whether their brain bumps made them a liar or not. Of course, nowadays we know better, and it's actually an indicator of how much pussy you get.
Despite its importance, this feature is often overlooked.
Freud even said,
"He that has eyes to see and ears to hear may convince himself that no mortal can keep a secret. If his lips are silent, he chatters with his fingertips. Betrayal oozes out of him at every pore."
which is probably why he didn't bother trying to hide the fact he wanted to fuck his own mum. Medieval legend claims that if you put your hand in this huge flat guy's mouth, he will bite your hand off if you lie, and he still serves as an extremely mediocre tourist attraction to this day. I'm not sure how well this lie detection method worked for the ancient Romans, but thankfully we can consult the Google reviews that they left.
Too many people, and it doesn't really bite.
Horrible.
Not impress us.
Nothing special.
In the 17th century, those who pathetically squealed out in pain after walking on hot coals were considered truthful. It turned out they actually were in agony, and women accused of performing the devil's magic were bound and chucked into bodies of water. If she was a floater, it meant she must have been a lying witch and sentenced to death by hanging. Of course, if she was a sinker, she was free to live her life as a bloated corpse at the bottom of a lake. In 300 BC...
Yeah, how do you... Yeah. Because if you sink... Like, I don't... That doesn't make any sense.
Prince Antiochus was bedridden with a sickness that made his dad all worried, but he wouldn't tell him what was wrong, and because none of them had iPhones yet, they couldn't call Jeremy Kyle for a lie detector test, so they had to get a physician called Erasistratus to take his pulse, and because it went up whenever his stepmom came near, they decided that he had the hots for her. And I won't say what happened afterwards, but I will say it's probably similar to some very popular videos on Pornhub, so that will give you an idea. Erasistratus is probably dead by now. So here in the UK, we've got Judy James on TV, who doesn't seem to have any qualifications except for a PhD, masters, and I don't know, probably a fucking BTEC in talking absolute shite. Of course, this makes her perfect for GB News, who regularly has her on as a guest, along with this guy.
My next guest has been called the human lie detector. Darren Stanton, formerly a frontline police officer, is now an acknowledged expert in the interpretation of body language, with a particular interest in deception detection. I think we should go through some clips of Prince Harry.
Home for me now is you know, for the time being, it's in the States. And it feels that way as well.
Does it?
Yeah. We've been welcomed with open arms, and it's got such a great community up in Santa Barbara. So
you feel like that's home more for you?
Yeah.
He has no confidence in what he's just said, saying that LA is now home. I don't believe he feels that way. He's really home.
That's the human lie detector. He should lay off the pies. Just kidding. That's mean. But come on, buddy.
I think he's homesick, and I think that's being conveyed by the body language.
Think that.
A lot of this goes back to primeval days, you know, sort of the fight or flight situation. So if we have to fight, the brain suddenly pumps adrenaline and blood to our hands, and if we want to run away, that's why we sometimes get this shaking our legs if we've, you know, had to run away from something.
Oh, and now we've got some Evo psych to explain why Prince Harry is lying about America being his new home. Of course, because the evil sorceress Meghan pussy-whipped him across the Atlantic Ocean. Yes, it's popped up again. You know how much I love evolutionary psychology. It's always very evidence-based, like good science is.
I used the survey poll of my ex-girlfriends to find out why my wife left me. Turns out it's because women are hardwired to hate me, and it's not misogyny because I have grafts. I also found that small penis size is correlated with large brain. It's an adaptation for survival, so don't fall over. No, you're not peer reviewing me. You just can't deal with the hard truth that we need to be breeding our most intelligent. So I should be raw dogging Carol Vorderman right now. Why won't you debate me? Are you scared of being steamrolled by my hard-to-swallow fat pills?
There's going to be a lot of pop Evo psych in this video, and I'm going to get very angry about it. Here's Australian TV programme The Morning Show, on which there's a regular guest body language analyst.
And then you'll notice that he puts his hands on the insides of his knees and sort of tries to withdraw. And they call that turtle.
I'm doing that right now. My hand is literally like, but that's just because my hands sweat. I have sweaty hands. Does that mean I'm lying? What am I lying about? Crazy.
Trying to go back into your shell.
Oh right, so he was touching cloth.
She has all the metrics.
They would have put it.
None of the body language of someone who is actually affectionate. So when he walked up, you would think that you would lean forward and put your arms in the cuddle.
She leaned forward to kiss him.
Instead, she put her hands flat on his chest and stood bolt upright. He then kissed her. She pushed him away and then...
She didn't even put her hands on his chest. What is she talking about?
She has all the affection of an alley cat.
Well, wouldn't you if your husband was brown crowning?
And I think it's for her that we have the tears during this funeral. She was hunched. She was slightly unstable on her...
She's old.
Feet. She seemed to be favouring one side.
She was hunched and unstable on her feet.
She was like 80.
Bitch, she was at death's door. Of course she's hunched. That's like saying, I don't like the way this 1-year-old is crawling on all fours. Stand up and walk like a normal person, you lazy piece of shit, baby.
Harry tapped the order of service on his thigh. Now this is anxiousness. It's look at that. It's nerves. But it's disrespect.
I'll tell you what's fucking disrespectful: judging someone's body language at their grandfather's funeral.
One job. You know, walk, look straight ahead, do nothing unusual, and with none of the other distractions. It stood out and unnecessary.
I'll tell you what's unnecessary. This TV segment. Your
Yeah.
entire career.
Damn.
What does this mean? Let's see what
She's funny. I like her.
Eric is up to.
I think Bernie's lying. We see him, he slouches forward anyway, Joy, but here he turtles. If you look at his eye level where he normally answers questions, when he makes the denial, his whole shoulders come up like a little kid getting caught. His eye level is below his shoulders. This is trying to hide in plain sight. He has
His eye what?
numerous hot spots. He says, well. Liars like to start with, well. He looks away, he laughs. If he said it, which I believe that he did, he would have been better to just own it.
Powerful stuff. Joy hiring a lie detector. That's like Charlie Sheen hiring a drug-sniffing dog.
No, it's more like hiring Keisha from the Sugar Babes to find out what consciousness is. It's a convenient excuse for
I didn't get that
reactionary
reference.
24-hour news broadcasts to put huge tickers across the screen saying things like, Joe has never looked weaker. We don't need a body language expert to tell us Brandon is so old he's in the process of being dragged down to hell by Satan himself.
You don't keep that look, that expression on your face for that long. That's that intense.
That's weird, man. That is really weird that they would be going to this length to portray him as something he is not. Bottom line.
Isn't that what they're doing? I don't understand.
It seems like we're in trouble with this guy. Am I wrong?
Do you think they realise what a still image is? Oh, but it gets even more insane than that. Americans are even analysing the body language of cereal mascots.
A Cornell University study found that adult cereals are placed on higher shelves, kids' cereals on lower ones. It's as if, from down there, the characters are trying to establish eye contact with kids.
Is your breakfast making eyes?
Well, isn't that obvious? Because kids are shorter. It's advertised to kids, not to parents. So the kids are shorter so they can see their cereals on the shelf. That has nothing to do with the characters. The characters bring attention to the cereal. But it's just because the kids are the ones who ask the parents, who are the adults with the money for the kids' cereal. Wouldn't it be? Isn't that just the logical marketing behind it?
So the boxes for the adult cereals,
Is your breakfast making eyes at you?
So the boxes for the adult cereals, the ones made out of hamster feed, lint, gravel, sawdust and twigs, look straight at you. And the children's cereals, made out of rainbows and diabetes, look down at your children at a 9.67 degree angle, which we all know is the angle pedos use. And now they're building pretty sizable audiences and racking up millions and millions of views on YouTube.com. After watching enough episodes of this tripe and subjecting myself to astronomical levels of nuclear conjecture, I can now quite confidently give you a tutorial on how to run a body language YouTube channel. Number 1. Pick a celebrity, preferably a woman, that a lot of people already hate. Number 2, find one interview with them, or even just one fucking still image of them to base your entire video around. Number 3, say that you've done some previous research to establish the celebrity's body language baseline.
And I feel like I can be fair and balanced because I've done a number of videos now on Meghan Markle. A number of hours I've studied to notice her emotional baseline.
Or just say that you've gleaned the baseline from the video itself somehow. Fuck it.
So during this first part, we're going to be looking at some of the nonverbal communication that displays itself while the gentleman is responding to more basic questions, and this will help us establish a rough, and emphasis on the rough, baseline of his normal nonverbal communication.
Wow. Wow.
Number 4, look for deviations from this body language baseline and cues of deception or hidden emotions. Now, say that you've seen a cluster of them.
We see lip licking. This is high sign of stress. It contributes to a cluster of deception. Then we see hesitation as he's trying to formulate an answer. So anytime you hear, that's the thing, here's the thing. So here's what I think about that. It's just someone trying to buy time to come up with an answer, and we could see him struggling. As he's saying that, we see an eye flutter. Whenever we do this, remember, it's a hard time processing something. So all that stuff before it leads me to believe that that is not exactly very truthful.
These don't have to be backed up by any sort of science. Just make sure it sounds like it could be true and likely follows your audience's preconceptions.
Notice the confused expression on her face. Eyebrows close together, squinty eyes, small mouth. But we would expect to see the shock, horror, and fear on her face of reliving that day.
Number 5, plug a book or a course that your mostly female audience will respond to by alluding that
That is true. It is mostly females that fall for these things. One thing I've noticed, like women, which is kind of in par with astrology and tarot reading and psychics and things like that.
will keep them safe from their torsos ending up in a wheelie bin.
So you can easily see the red flags to look out for to identify a psychopath in your own life.
Number 6.
I think I identified one in that little video, and he wasn't Ted Bundy.
Next, create a thumbnail in which you include a frame that makes the person look as insane as possible. Arbitrarily draw a circle around any part of that person's face, or even, fuck it, their hair, or just a stock image of some domestic
Their hair.
violence. Ooh, what do you think this body language could mean? I think he's saying, your neck looks so very tired from holding your head up all the time. Let me help. Is that better? 7, repeat. 8, profit. Eventually, many of them simply become glorified gossip channels, jumping on the latest Karen video to give their expert psychoanalysis, dancing between the glaringly obvious.
Also, clenched fists are a very strong sign of anger.
And then wild conjecture, such as going the easy route of...
It could also be anxiety. It could be many things. It could be, you know, frustration. It doesn't have to be anger.
Blaming everything on bad parenting without an iota of background info on the person.
Instead of educating her when she was young that this type of behavior isn't acceptable, her parents simply conceded and gave her what she wanted.
Or they'll completely fall down the tabloid content black hole and end up devoting their supposed body language channel to picking apart every move of Meghan Markle, but claiming that this shit is backed up by science, so apparently it's educational and flies right under YouTube's harassment policies, when in reality it's straight up pathetic bullying for profit. This man's channel has strayed so far from apparent body language at this point that he's looking at 2 pictures of Meghan and questioning how on earth she could have applied some makeup to her face within the space of 24 hours.
How is it possible that these 2 pictures were taken in less than 24 hours apart?
It's a fucking mystery. But don't worry.
Did this guy ever live with a woman? Ever being close to a woman?
They're very forthcoming about the
crazy.
shortcomings of this science, but it's still a science, right? Not a pseudoscience, or it might be a pseudoscience. A bit.
This is what I'm interested in.
But before we get into that,
Sponsor.
the hope we have, other than somehow fighting our way onto Jeff Bezos' spaceship, is convincing our governments to actually work together and fucking do something about it. And yes, corporate carbon offsets are a scam, and even the phrase carbon footprint was coined by a frickin' oil company to put the blame on you instead of them. We can do every little bit we can. Vegan diet and hard fun by workout.
Oh, yeah, it's an ad.
For yourself. Groups that and power. So offset 100 people their name.
It activates the limbic system.
When I say see deception, I mean likelihood of deception.
It activates the limbic system. Biology doesn't lie. And if you're arguing against this, you're arguing against biology. I can't lie. I don't want him to be too aroused. But the data doesn't lie. Biology doesn't lie.
Horizontal gaze aversion. This is one of the pre-flight indicators that we teach to police officers.
Yeah, it is easy to get lost in pseudoscience. Trust me, this isn't pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is kind of, it's similar but different.
He just told on himself.
Really far from being a pseudoscience. It's an actual science. It's not, I'm not making this kind of things up.
We call this a science. It's based in science, but there's a hell of a lot of art to what we do, stringing all these pieces together.
So this is science, but strung together in an artistic way, like a Magic Eye poster, or lab rats doing synchronized swimming. Most body language YouTube channels will remain conveniently vague when it comes to how precise their analysis is meant to be, but Observe, to his credit, likes to offer up at least an idea.
Speaking on that science, nonverbal communication is on average 70 to 80% accurate, with some leeway on either side. You can push it up to 100%, but you can also drop it down to worse than a guess.
I think 70 to 80% accurate with some leeway either side.
So it just means they're just shooting in the dark. It's just like giving you a horoscope and telling you something good's gonna happen in your life, or like you've been stressed about something, or like you've been waiting for a response on something, and you're gonna get a resolution on a question you've been having for the last while. Is vague enough that it could fit into something in your life, because we're always waiting for something. We're all waiting for like when you do things like that, it's vaguely enough that it could fit. Then your confirmation bias fills in the gaps and makes you believe like, oh yeah, no shit, that is true. I am doing that. Yeah, no, I'm waiting for that kind of thing. You know, I'm not good at it, so it doesn't work. But you get the idea.
Can go down to below 50% or worse than a guess is basically code for an opinion I pulled out of my arse. Here are some more clips from Observe, which should totally clear up whether this is a pseudoscience or not.
Your brain takes in millions of bits of information per second. We are privy ourselves consciously to a very tiny fraction of that. Like, I think it's maybe 40,000. Don't quote me on those numbers because it's been a while since I've had to do that research. Don't
Then why even say it?
Hold the science to my opinion. My opinion's over here, and I keep it educated, but it's still just an opinion, and it should be held with a grain of salt. The science just shows that Hair by Jay was insincere. I'll talk about some of my, I would say even just assumptions at the end, my opinion side of things, so that's separate from the science, but that'll be at the end. The science says that he was insincere. My opinion says that he was trash. The science doesn't show that. That's just my opinion of what the science is showing. It is not a complete science as something like psychology is. It is not quite a pseudoscience. It is a mixture in between.
Yeah, I'm completely lost. But nevertheless, they will be sure to try and convince you of all of the science or pseudoscience all of this is based on, which is often evolutionary psychology.
This part of the brain has been practicing facial expressions for a bazillion years. This part is pretty damn new at it.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with evolutionary psychology.
Those muscles on both sides of the face.
I think it's just it's just a way to this is a guess, I'm not sure. I think, but the science of it is they're trying to explain certain psychological things, body things, biology things based on evolutionary data, but doesn't always ring true. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like they're trying to guess and they're trying to attribute certain things, explanations to certain behaviors that aren't necessarily correlated whatsoever.
Science.
I think that's my
the fight or
understanding.
flight response when people say that there's fight, flight, faint, or freeze is technically what the new accepted model is.
If she was as frightened as she was trying to portray, that limbic system, that amygdala, would have happened in a millisecond.
In my opinion, body language and behavior profiling is a lot like meteorology. There's a
So it's just
99
guessing.
and maybe 100% chance of precipitation here, deception. But it's likely nobody can really put their finger on it because the mammalian part of our brain doesn't really speak English.
Most of the time, when we instinctively distrust someone, it's because of a past experience, because we just don't like them, or negative stereotypes. Our brains strive to create narratives out of a complex and nuanced world to make sense of it. Humans are pattern seeking because it helps us to learn, but sometimes this causes us to see connections and correlations between pieces of information which in reality are completely random, and sometimes the patterns we choose to see can reveal our innermost desires. Such as, have you ever seen a house that looks like a face? Or a cloud that looks like a huge throbbing cock? No, me neither. Confirmation bias helps us massively with pattern seeking and is far stronger than any mammalian intuition we might have, if that even exists. There's no proof that your reptile brain is picking up signals because it's trained over thousands of years of evolution to pick up non-verbal signals before we learnt to use language. These experts will often talk their pseudoscientific bollocks off about the mammalian brain, or reptilian brain, which is just a pop evolutionary psychology term for the limbic system. Look, it's like your brain's balls. It supposedly activates your uncontrollable, instinctual urges like being scared or horny, your fight or flight or suck or fuck response. Then, when humans evolved from reptiles, pop evo psych says we just dumped a load of new brain layers on top, and these are the parts we use to hide these instinctual urges, or do art, or science, or lie our tits off. I'm going to reference a paper here which is titled in a way which, to be honest, all scientific papers should probably be titled, because then people might actually read them instead of watching YouTubers. I'm linking all of these in a Google Doc in the description, but you won't bloody read them, will you? Yeah, I've got to read them for you.
I will read them because I'm making a research study for it as well, but in Spanish. Because as a YouTuber, I kind of want to expose, because she does this all the time. She does gossip videos about body language, and it's honestly quite annoying.
You lazy sods. Absolute cooks to your limbic system, the lot of you. Chasing animalistic pleasure at all times. So, in the paper, Your Brain is Not an Onion with a Tiny Reptile Inside, published in 2020, they explain why this outdated view, still prominent in a lot of psychology discourse, is actually impeding our progress in understanding the human brain. In simple terms, the paper explains that limbic brain theory comes from the belief that humans evolved linearly from reptiles, but this has long been known to be false. Rather, we have common ancestors, fish. So if anything, we should be calling it a fish brain, not a reptilian brain, but that would still be wrong. Evolution happens by existing body parts mutating, not by simply plopping new ones on top of old ones. If that's how it worked, we'd all be walking around looking like this. Of course, peer-reviewed scientific studies on body language do exist, and they will get cited by body language experts on the rare occasion to rebut any skeptics. For example, on Last Week Tonight, John Oliver did a piece about police interrogations in which he said that police officers are being trained to use pseudoscientific non-verbal cues in order to detect deception. The Behavioural Arts channel didn't like this and invited on a friend from the Behaviour Panel channel, Chase Hughes, to rebut his claims. So under this video, they cite various studies which supposedly show that there is some scientific consensus around non-verbal lie detection.
You can name studies that didn't work, but there are also enormous amounts of studies that did work.
But here's the problem. I have read so many peer-reviewed studies at this point centered around body language, and this is the conclusion that I have come to. Are you ready? There is a lot of profit to be made from government agencies and from the general public that could come from being able to universally read body language and accurately detect deception. So the research gets funded, and there is a lot of it. However, I have never investigated a subject with so many peer-reviewed studies surrounding it that directly contradict each other. But that's the thing. This is human behavior. There are huge limitations to be applied to any study that has to conduct experiments on human behavior, because you can't control for the situation. You can only control for the person. And even then, you can only control for the person within the confines of the experiment, which leaves you with an extremely limited study. And remember that none of these studies are based around high stakes lies like the ones that they're analysing in their YouTube videos, because that's impossible to study. It's a bit unethical to take study volunteers, bring them to a lab, kidnap their cat and go, "Convince me you didn't eat that cookie," or "Brooklyn here gets it." These studies generally don't recreate real-life lies for various reasons, but the main reasons are, in the lab, observers usually have to make very quick decisions as to whether they think someone is lying. Sometimes observers are watching a video and unable to interact with the person they're trying to analyze. Real-life lies are often buried within truthful stories, and the stakes for the liar are not high in the research lab, and the liars and observers do not know each other. Pseudoscience works so well because it usually bases itself off what people's intuitions are, and often gives immediate and easy solutions to complex problems. Think TikTok crystal mummies or holistic cancer therapy. Observe and others will insinuate that if people have these funny feelings and intuitions about people, which who doesn't, they can train themselves up and use them properly and read people like a book in everyday life. But this has to be built upon reliable research to even be possible. The founder of Synagogy even admitted, "What we absolutely do not believe in within Synagogy is experiment, because body language is made in such a way that when we participate in an experiment, it does not work," and argued that you can't use replication when dealing with humans. However, that doesn't stop them charging 6,000 Canadian dollars to anyone who wants to become a synagoguist and claiming that it will allow people to detect lies accurately 80% of the time after 200 hours of training. For example, in the studies that the behavioral arts linked under this video, one of them is not from a peer-reviewed journal and also from 1969. Any scientific study from over 50 years ago should immediately ring alarm bells, because methodology has gone through vast improvements since then, and there's probably another better study that's been carried out since that completely proves it wrong. And guess what? There is a better study that's been carried out since that completely proves it wrong. Then there's another study he links which is based on one experiment that showed that liars move less. Then in the conclusion, the author slags off the methodology of the first author, and then they cite a study which supposedly shows that training people to detect deception improves their accuracy. However, of course, there is a limitation. Existing research does not address questions of training transfer, i.e., do the results of the training transfer to real-world settings of interest, and clarifies that training was most effective when it incorporated reliable indicators of deception, i.e. found to be the most reliable via empirical evidence. So, which cues of deception are actually deemed to be the most reliable? Well, to their credit, they also cite a comprehensive meta-analysis of 116 body language studies, which attempted to find the most reliable cues to deception to date, incorporating 158 different body language cues. However, the cues used in this meta-analysis included both verbal cues as well as non-verbal. The cues studied across the different experiments varied, but when examining the 50 most tested cues of all of the studies, only 35 of them had at least a non-verbal component to them, and 71% of those 35 non-verbal cues did not show any relationship with deception at all. Out of the top 14 most effective cues out of the whole 50, only 4 of them were classed as entirely non-verbal, with 3 of them being the least effective out of those 14. Basically, the conclusion of this meta-analysis that they linked in their YouTube video, when you really tear it apart, is that trying to use non-verbal cues to detect deception is near impossible, even for a supposed body language expert. In fact, since this very meta-analysis that they cite was completed, most researchers have actually abandoned looking into non-verbal indicators of deceit and are focusing on verbal indicators instead, i.e. listening to the things people actually say, because that's far more reliable. This meta-analysis also revealed another interesting caveat of non-verbal lie detection. Messages judged from visual cues result in a lie bias. In experiments carried out which stripped out the visual element, observers actually increased accuracy from 54% to 63%. So trying to do non-verbal lie detection actually makes your hit rate worse, because you're more likely to rely on stereotypical beliefs and cognitive bias, which is often wrong. Another aspect of this science that's popular among these YouTube channels and various books written on the subject is the supposed technique of baselining.
Baseline. People have a certain baseline behavior that they maintain a certain amount of eye contact. If I just saw someone increasing eye contact after I asked them a question, it would be meaningless unless it was accompanied by a number of other things.
The first thing that we do is establish a baseline. So we look at someone's normal nonverbal communication.
It's a person's nonverbal communication at rest, or as they would.
But how do you know what's a person's baseline nonverbal communication? Like, What if somebody's lying all the time? Is that their baseline? Like, how do you assess a baseline? It doesn't make any fucking sense.
Would normally act in a situation. This is used to be able to establish positive and negative spikes in their baseline to hopefully unearth possible deception.
Keep in mind, her baseline, the way she typically acts, is with a head nod. When someone's asking her a question, she'll be giving a head nod. So if she really believed in what she was saying, you would think she would have a head nod when she was asked something that she truly believed in. But she didn't. She had a head shake.
Yeah, this is a good baseline because this is the way he talks in every interview.
This is why it's important to research the body language baseline or usual emotional displays of the person.
So here are all the studies I found that mentioned baselining as a method of deception detection. Instructing participants to make a within-statement baseline comparison did not improve the accuracy of credibility assessments. Exposure to a truthful baseline statement resulted in a lower truth accuracy, but no difference in lie accuracy. Fundamental differences exist between small talk and the investigative part of the interview. Results indicated that truth tellers and liars changed their behaviors from the baseline to the investigative part of the interview to the same extent. I didn't find any studies that supported baselining. In fact, we haven't even established that humans have a baseline at all. We all act differently in basically every situation we're in. We can be comfortable and relaxed in multiple situations, but it can be the people we're around that will still affect the way we act. For example, as much as I'll feel comfortable around my grandparents, I'll also feel comfortable around my close friends, but I probably wouldn't flash my grandparents for a laugh. Another term you might hear a lot on Body Language YouTube is micro expressions.
But at the same time, we see about an even number of contempt expressions or micro expressions.
There's her nonverbal communication of her face went, her micro expressions.
Early, he said.
As well as a combination of some micro expressions and micro behaviors that we go into later on in this video.
Rick again shoots another micro expression with his mouth. He tenses his lip, which is a sign of anger and stress.
If you've heard of micro expressions before, it's basically just a tiny, quick facial expression.
So, micro expressions is a term coined by Paul Ekman, who discovered them. And I kind of feel a bit bad going in on this guy's entire life's work. To be honest, he's 88 years old now and just sort of pottering about mostly, retired, proud of his accomplishments. His daughter following on in his footsteps. But my God, did he fuck everything up? Holy shit. Micro expressions supposedly reveal your true emotions, the mammalian, reptile emotions that you try to mask. Ekman, who supposedly discovered micro expressions, has his work often promoted on Body Language YouTube.
And we see a really great tiny micro expression of disgust the moment the woman says 2008 BMW. You can learn about those micro expressions at bodylanguagetactics.com. I actually went to the course. It is in there.
So we must focus in voice tone, hand gestures, and subtle micro expressions.
The first one is something I know because of a researcher named Paul Ekman. He is the godfather of micro expressions and the author of many books, including Telling Lies, which is an incredible book all about the science of deception.
And then anything by Dr. Paul Ekman is going to go really, really well for nonverbal communication of the face. So micro expressions, mini expressions.
Observed's channel is even supposedly Ekman Group certified and is partnered with the Emotional Intelligence Academy, and you can get 50% off a master's degree on getting to the truth. I'm no expert on the academic process, but getting a master's degree from a link you clicked on in the description of a YouTube video, I imagine is like the equivalent of finding a Legoland driving license in a pool of vomit outside a Wetherspoons and framing it. You even get to learn from the team behind the Discovery Channel's Faking It. This is apparently a course on the skills and techniques to accurately read the behaviors of others and use these skills to assess a person's credibility by learning to read clustered cues of deception and micro-expressions, all based around Ekman's work. So I'm going to try and explain all of this science jargon-filled drama to you without your brains collapsing in on themselves like a cheap IKEA sofa bed. Paul Ekman is a professor emeritus of psychology at the University of California and the first psychologist to examine human emotion at scale. He was inspired by the work of God's #1 hater, Charles Darwin, who maybe should have read some of his own books, then he might not have had 10 kids with his first cousin, causing 3 of them to die from genetic illnesses before they reached 11. Darwin theorized that human and animal expressions were universal and genetically determined. However, Darwin's #1 hater and feminist queen, Margaret Mead, came along in the 50s and fucked shit up by queefing out a new theory, which was that non-verbal communication was actually dictated by culture and upbringing. A completely impartial observer, DARPA, came along and they really wanted to settle this science fracas for some reason, so they chucked a load of money at it. You could possibly argue, maybe, that an agency dealing with the defense budget for an entire country might be looking for ways to quickly and therefore cheaply profile people, and as such, finding universality among human expression was probably going to be pretty beneficial for them at border control, and you might call that a conflict of interest. Or you might not. Well, anyway, they gave Ekman a grant, and he grabbed his mate Wallace Friesen and they went to work. In the 60s, they went to Chile, Argentina, Brazil, the US, and Japan to shove flashcards of posed expressions in people's faces and say, hey, pick which emotion this is out of these 6 exact choices that were chosen by me. No, you can't pick any other option. That's not allowed. That's not science. Then Ekman decided to do the same thing with a remote tribe in Papua New Guinea who had never had any contact with other cultures or media, and took pictures of their expressions to show Western cultures to see if the reverse was also applicable. By the way, Ekman had no prior experience of the 4 tribe, had done barely any research on them, and had to rely on translators. He described the process in his book Emotions Revealed like pulling teeth. Nevertheless, Ekman and Friesen somehow miraculously came to the conclusion that there were 6 universal expressions of emotion. Darwin had supposedly won the science beef, but this wasn't very useful for DARPA. Hey, come on, what am I meant to do with this, huh? I mean, this was all completely very good, non-biased science. So Ekman and Friesen then came to the conclusion that these universal emotional expressions are masked by our learned cultural behaviors, but they could be unmasked by spotting a fleeting micro-expression lasting less than half a second that exposes someone's true emotions. But it was still too vague for DARPA to use at border control. I mean, this was all completely very good, non-biased science. So Ekman and Friesen codified a system that would universally detect and analyze human facial expressions, and in 1978 released the Facial Action Coding System, or FACS. But in the 70s and 80s, analyzing video footage of human expression was a slow and tedious process, with it taking around an hour to analyze 1 minute of footage, because they had to use this stuff called paper and these things called pens. Then the 90s came around and these computers started popping up everywhere, and eventually they figured out that they weren't only useful for goatsy Neopets and horned-up Good Charlotte fanfiction, they could also be used to profile innocent people based on shaky science. The Department of Defense saw computers as an opportunity to automate Ekman and Friesen's fax system, but they needed data. So multiple labs started collecting scores of images based on Ekman's 6 universal emotion categories, from staged images generated inside the lab by actors and from spontaneous images from real life. It was a success. Ekman claimed that his system could detect deception with an 80 to 90% hit rate. Somehow, and it was widely accepted by many other scientists and by government agencies. He sold the fax training program to the CIA, the FBI, Customs and Border Protection, and the TSA, and even ended up consulting with Pixar to help with the animation of faces on Inside Out. Ekman's work on fax became so influential that Time named him one of the top 100 most influential people of 2009. But the lab-grown science beef was not over. Ekman has suffered painful science punches from all directions ever since. A science punch is like a normal punch, but with graphs instead of fists. One sciencey punch came from Lisa Fieldman Barrett, who reran Ekman's flashcard study, but without asking the respondents to pick from 6 choices of emotion, but to freely describe it. Ekman's correlation blew up in his face like a sciencey bukkake. Disgusting. Then there was a sciencey nipple grab and twist from Charles Huntz, a psychologist at Boise State University, who actually was trained up on fags and attempted to replicate Ekman's results to no avail. Then there was a sciencey groin stomp by a study on Ekman's work that was carried out in 2008, which found that micro-expressions only occurred in 14 of the video fragments they analysed, which was 2% of the total videos that they analysed, and 6 of those 14 were displayed by truth tellers. Then Ekman got a sciencey flick on the bollock from another study in 2019, which involved videotapes of high-stakes liars, and found that observers who had been trained up on Ekman's system ended up scoring below chance, or worse than a guess. Then psychologist Carlos Crivelli at De Montfort University in Leicester even went to Papua New Guinea himself to try and recreate Ekman's study and found no evidence for his claims. He came back and said, trying to assess mental states from external markers is like trying to measure mass in meters. Oof! A sciencey cigarette burn. Furthermore, a vast literature review, which spanned 2.5 decades and analysed 1,000 scientific papers, concluded in 2018 that Ekman's universal expression system was backed up by little to no evidence. Okay, now that one was a science slap in the tits. Ekman's health bar was looking pretty low, and you would think, well, to fight back, Ekman could just release a study to the scientific community to be peer-reviewed, right? One that proves that training people on facts to detect micro-expressions improves deception detection? You know, the entire system that he sold to the CIA, the TSA, and the FBI? And now YouTubers, so people can check whether it's based on actual evidence? Well, no. He refuses, saying that it would threaten national security. No, I'm not kidding. None of this is peer-reviewed. None of it. Regardless, Ekman has sold the spot check system to the TSA with the promise that behaviour detection officers would be able to detect a potentially dangerous passenger by simply observing their behaviour at the airport within 30 seconds. It was
What?
implemented because it was low cost and quick to put into place in the aftermath of 9/11. It has an annual cost of $212 million, and the only thing it has ever been proven to be effective at is allowing BDOs to disproportionately profile passengers of ethnic minorities, whilst claiming that they've been pulling people aside for unusual behaviour. And not one single terrorist has ever been caught through Ekman's spot program. Only 1% of the people BDOs detect as suspicious based on behavioral cues has ever been arrested, and it's always been for crimes not related to terrorism. The supposed deception cues that BDOs are keeping an eye out for include all of these, and you're all on the list.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are all domestic terrorists.
The Government Accountability Office have conducted multiple reviews of the SPOT program spanning through 2010 to 2017, and they found that the human ability to accurately identify deceptive behavior based on behavioral indicators is the same as or slightly better than chance. Consequently, the GAO has recommended limiting funding for the SPOT
So
program.
it's all bullshit.
But it still runs
This is what I'm
to
getting
this
out of it.
day. And then, oh god, Ekman didn't stop. He and another scientist, Maureen O'Sullivan, set out to see whether there were people in the world with a natural gift for spotting deception and micro-expressions, hoping to be able to reverse engineer their talent in order to sell training on lie detection, and they called it the Wizards Project. After testing 20,000 people, they came out with 50 people whom they affectionately called Truth Wizards, which sounds like a cult your uncle joined shortly before he started burying gold bullion in the garden and trying to sell you crystal water filters. However, other scientists who analysed their methodology have pointed out that this study suffered from a major flaw called a type 1 error. That means that statistically the 50 wizards that they found simply got lucky. Like, imagine if all of the wizards in Harry Potter couldn't really do magic and they just got lucky on some dodgy science experiment with flawed methodology, and then they spent the entire movie franchise just trying to wing it. You're a truth wizard, Harry! I'm a fucking what? You're pushing me over the fucking line! I'm gonna put my fucking dick in the oil! But one of these wizards, Renee Ellery, has started selling courses, of course, on how you can become a truth wizard.
That's the point.
At a cost of $1,900.
They all sell courses. I think a good way to spot a scammer if they sell you a course. If they sell you a course, that's a scammer.
$50, boasting that she has been tested by science. Yet she refuses to have her talent be tested by anyone other than Ekman, telling The Intercept that she's already been scientifically validated and she doesn't need to reprove it to anyone. And now she's even training up the police. But despite all of this, Fox commissioned a show in 2009 called Lie to Me, based on Ekman's life work, and promoted it as if it was empirical, scientific fact across 3 seasons. Just look at the opening scene.
Now look at his mouth. The suspect is secretly happy about the locations we are searching, which tells me we have the wrong location.
If your suspect is surprised for more than a second, he's faking it.
These expressions are universal. Emotion looks the same whether you're a suburban housewife or a suicide bomber.
Ekman served as a scientific consultant on the show to make sure.
I like that show. I watched the whole 3 seasons. I really liked
The
it.
producers were sticking
Damn.
to the science as much as possible. They even included a character who was a supposed natural truth wizard. He also saw it as an opportunity to sell his facts training course to the general public, so they could all become human lie detectors, just like him.
Just cause someone's got doctor in front of their name, don't let them put their finger up your arse.
Body language content relies heavily on appeals to authority. This will range from, I'm in the FBI, I've trained Fortune 500 company CEOs, to, I once saw someone blink. It doesn't seem to matter.
My name is Joe Navarro, and for 25 years I was a spy catcher with the FBI, and I am a nonverbal communications expert.
Well, I'm Scott Rouse, and I'm a body language expert and analyst. I train law enforcement in the military in interrogation and body language.
I'm Jim Clementi. I'm a retired FBI supervisory special agent and profiler in the behavioral analysis.
Yeah, I'm Greg Hartley. I was an Army interrogator, so I got started with the whole body language and behavior thing. Today, I'm a body language behavior guy, and I work in the corporate side of things.
I would be qualified as a researcher or a specialist. And since I do a vast amount of work in the field, then that's kind of why I went with the master's program.
After my degree in social psychology, I studied criminal interrogation. This was one of my biggest influences. Actually, I would say the biggest influence.
Hi there, I'm Mark Bowden. I'm an expert in human behavior and body language. I've written 4 books on the subject. I speak all over the world.
Everybody, I'm Chase Hughes. I did a 20-year career in the U.S. military, retired as a chief, and now I develop intelligence and behavioral techniques for intelligence agencies, businesses, and I also teach interrogation and behavior profiling.
Oh my God.
Just because someone was able to sell a course or a keynote speech to some Fortune 500 companies, law enforcement, or intelligence agencies doesn't mean they weren't selling a course or keynote speech chock full of bullshit to Fortune 500 companies, law enforcement, and intelligence agencies.
Exactly.
These people have managed to fashion entire careers around teaching people skills that they've never actually proven they have.
Chase Hughes is a 20-year U.S. military veteran who now teaches businesses and elite government sectors.
I met our guest about a year ago when he was actively serving the United States Navy.
Best-selling author of the Ellipsis Manual, Chase Hughes.
We are joined by military intelligence behavioral expert Chase Hughes.
This is as close as people can come to having a superpower.
In fact, studies have shown that no matter what your profession is, you're going to have about a 54% hit rate when trying to detect deception, which is not much better than flipping a coin. Humans are fucking terrible at this. Chase Hughes has never had to prove his skills to anyone, but despite that, he's going around giving speeches and has even written up a behavioral table of elements. He's gone and fucking quantified deception detection to an exact science, not backed up by any evidence, just a trust me bro. But oh well, as long as it looks like something sciencey, it must be legit, right? It's the same shape as a sciencey thing, and he's not the only guy doing this. You might have seen ex-FBI agent Joe Navarro's videos on the Wired YouTube channel, racking up millions of views. So I bought his book, of course, and he cites studies throughout to supposedly prove what he's saying, but as I've explained, pointing to a single study in this area of science doesn't prove anything. Your best bet is looking at the meta-analyses, but even then they sometimes disagree with each other, and they're all based on lab tests which are wildly different from the scenarios Navarro describes in this book. And the scenarios that Navarro chooses to involve in his book always make him look like some kind of fucking super cop. In this particular situation, I noticed a man standing near the cash register at the checkout counter, a behavior that caught my attention because he seemed to have no reason to be there. He wasn't waiting in line, and he hadn't purchased any items. Moreover, the entire time he stood there, his eyes were fixed on the cash register. While I was still observing him, his behavior changed. Specifically, his nostrils started flaring, nasal wing dilation, which was a giveaway that he was oxygenating in advance of taking some action. I guessed what that action was going to be about a second before it occurred, and a second was all I had to sound a warning. I yelled to the cashier, "Watch out!" as 3 things happened at once. A, the clerk finished ringing up a sale, causing the cash drawer to open. B, the man near the register lunged forward, plunging his hand into the drawer to grab some cash. And C, alerted by my shouted warning, the cashier grabbed the man's hand and twisted it, causing the would-be robber to drop the money and run out of the store. Had I not spotted his intention cue, I am sure the thief would have succeeded in his efforts. Incidentally, the cashier was my father, who was running a small hardware store in Miami back in 1974.
Really?
I was his summer hire. I I'm sure these anecdotes were a daily occurrence for him and were absolutely not cherry-picked to make him sound good or made up entirely. And of course, at times he will just veer off into some wild conjecture based on evolutionary psychology. Why are the feet and legs such accurate reflectors of our sentiments? For millions of years, long before humans spoke, our legs and feet reacted to the environmental threats, e.g. hot sand, meandering snakes, ill-tempered lions, instantaneously, without the need for conscious thought. Our limbic brains made sure that our feet and legs reacted as needed. With regard to these life-saving group behaviors, little has changed in 5 million years. Oh really? You were there 5 million years ago, were you, Joe? Looking at people's feet, the most dedicated foot fetishist ever. When Navarro was asked about the meta-analysis, which concluded that non-verbal cues have an extremely weak link to deception, his response was, non-verbals are quicker to observe, and they're authentic and very accurate. He points to the role of body language in understanding what a baby is feeling before it's able to talk, and in whether one feels safe in the presence of potentially threatening behavior. People even pick mates based on non-verbal cues, he says. But he agrees that some kinds of behavior can be more reliably interpreted than others, and that non-verbal behavior is not effective for conclusively detecting deception. Citation, trust me, bro, me in FBI. And babies. He spends this entire book telling stories about how he's been able to use his acute detective skills to deduce when someone's hiding something from him. Yet, he even admits at the end that FBI agents are empirically no better at detecting deception than the average person. So at the end, he basically says, yeah, everything you just read, useless. I hope you enjoyed wasting 8 hours of your time reading this shit. But he tries to sort of get around this by insinuating that deception detection is different from the scenarios he's described throughout the book. But it's not. In one of them, he describes how he was able to tell a woman was hiding the fact that her son was in her house because she was touching her neck when she said that he wasn't there. Joe, that's deception. Another ex-FBI agent that Wired showcases, called Jim Clement, outright talks about being able to spot cues to deception, including fidgeting, and saying our fight or flight response causes it because it's sending energy to our limbs ready for action, then starts going on about fucking baselining.
Once you've normed an individual, you look for changes in their behavior. Someone who's been sitting straight and answering questions directly and looking right in your eyes and being very attentive might become fidgety. We look at fight or flight, cognitive complexity, and perception management. Decrease in salivation, increased heart rate, or increased adrenaline to the hands and legs. Our primitive brain wants to tell us to either stand and fight or run away. So it provides extra energy to your limbs. And there's no better example of this than when Jodi Arias
extra energy to your limbs.
Got up from the chair and went over to the wall and did a handstand for several seconds. It's a perfect example of fight or flight.
And Jim Clement, since leaving the FBI because he realized that this grift could make him a lot more money, was a writer and producer for this CBS documentary about the JonBenet Ramsey case. The entire show is chock full of appeals to authority, making it seem like they'd got all of the best experts in the world to crack this case once and for all. Now, let me be clear. They based this show on a book in which the author comes to the conclusion that her brother Berg did it. Jim Clement built an entire show based around the premise of this book, in which they act out scenarios where they're reviewing evidence and they pretend like they're having insane breakthroughs in front of the camera, thanks to the experts on the show.
Oh my God. What did you find?
What did you find?
Right. What did you find? It sounds like a smaller voice, though. It doesn't sound like a booming adult.
Right. The whole show is written to make it look like law enforcement are geniuses, including Clement himself. Among other evidence, Clement analyzes footage of Burke talking to a child psychologist, and among droning horror music, he speculates that Burke's body language isn't quite right for a kid whose sister has just died in a horrific way, whatever that's meant to look like.
How do you have you seen a lot of kids? Like, how do you know that? Like, where you were basing that information from? That doesn't make any fucking sense.
Any indication yet that this child has been through a recent trauma, and he doesn't
worry about himself or worry that they may come back for him. I mean, that's another thing that normally plays on a child's mind.
Does that look like cereal inside there?
Such a simple question to ask. So why isn't he just saying what it is? He's evading any answer and is uncomfortable about answering it.
Of course, throughout, we're reminded of Clement's authority and why we should be listening to him.
I'm going to be really interested in looking at his behavior.
I'm a retired FBI profiler. I'm an expert in the areas of child sex crimes, child abductions, and child homicides. Over the course of my career, I've actually attended training and given training to child interview specialists.
Burke Ramsey sued the shit out of CBS for the release of this documentary. They settled out of court. This business is an ego drive for police officers and FBI agents. An ego drive that makes them a lot of money. But this isn't the only instance of police using bad body language science to profile people. The Reid technique and aspects of it have been used in American police interrogations since the 1950s. It was popularized by John E. Reid when he managed to coax a confession out of a man for killing his own wife after 12 hours of grueling interrogation. A confession which he recanted the next day, only for the guy who actually did it to come forward decades later, exonerating him after 13 years of imprisonment. The original Reid training materials claimed that this interrogation technique could spot a liar with 85% accuracy, but over the decades it has proven notorious for extracting false confessions from innocent suspects. The training material was written on evidence based entirely on law enforcement's experience and uses non-verbal lie detection techniques such as baselining a person's behavior and then analyzing whether they deviate from that with various cues such as gaze aversion or crossing your arms. Conversely, studies have shown that the more confident an officer is about someone's guilt, the more likely they are to be wrong.
Exactly.
So if the cop notices these supposed deception cues and suspects deception, they move on to the 9 steps of interrogation, all of which are designed to gaslight the subject into confessing over hours of psychological turmoil. A Supreme Court judgment even allowed police officers to lie to suspects about the existence of evidence to try and elicit a confession. A confession which is permitted and absolutely will be used in court in front of a jury, who will see it as even more compelling than DNA evidence. The Innocence Project has exonerated a total of 337 people based on DNA evidence, and a third of them had falsely confessed to the crime. For those exonerated for murder in particular, 62% had confessed. In fact, research has shown that, unsurprisingly, the factor that gives the most weight when observers make a decision about whether someone is lying is their overall trust of that person, based on cognitive bias and stereotypes. And what's more, research has shown that people are less likely to trust people who have the mannerisms of a culture which is different to their own or are of a different race. And that's why the use of body language in law enforcement needs to be completely abolished. And what's more, if the people watching these body language YouTube channels end up, say, in an HR department or on a jury, they're going to feel overly confident in their skills in reading non-verbal deception, and they'll end up acting upon their gut feelings, i.e. their prejudices. And YouTube channels like JCS, I'm sorry to say, aren't really doing much to help the problem. These videos are often accurate about the strategies being employed by officers, but will use examples of cases wherein the subject was obviously guilty, giving the impression that these techniques are getting dangerous people off the streets, when in reality, these techniques are also putting innocent people in jail. So I'm going to give JCS the JCS treatment.
The rest of Chris's conduct could be analyzed and dissected in various various ways, and it would be easy to pick at certain oddities in body language and link them with signs of guilt. Yet, without the hindsight we have now, his behavior could just as easily be linked with an innocent man who is understandably concerned and frantic over the disappearance of his family. His very conservant neighbor, however, had the perceptual advantage of knowing Chris on a semi-personal level, and could analyze his kinesics in a far more accurate manner than the police officer.
Empirical evidence actually shows that baselining someone's character gives an observer no advantage in spotting deception and can actually impede their abilities, no matter how well the people know each other. Chris's neighbour already had the reason to be suspicious at this point because he'd already watched his own CCTV footage and seen Chris loading his truck. His observation of Chris's body language are now mostly driven by confirmation bias.
One of the oldest and most commonly used techniques is for the interrogator to sit between the door and the suspect. This is for the purpose of heightening the feelings of isolation and dependence. It's an indirect subliminal message, letting Chris know that the only way out of that room is through the detective. It's an excellent tool for stripping away confidence, thus increasing the telling signs and body language when information is fabricated.
JCS is telling us accurate information about the methods of interrogation here. However, there is no scientific evidence to support that increasing stress in subjects causes them to show any signs in body language in a guilty person that would differ in any way from an innocent person in the same position. This flawed technique often gives police officers a false sense of confidence in their assumptions of guilt. This can lead the officer's line of questioning to follow a more accusatory tone, which sets off a positive feedback loop of rising tension between the interrogator and subject, giving the police officer an increasing confidence in their misplaced assumption of guilt.
The sharp and sudden change of angle from baseline questioning to direct confrontation would normally make an innocent person refute or at least challenge the statement. There would also be a brief pause, as they would need time to process the allegation due to its perplexity. A guilty individual would already be in a defensive state of mind and would normally respond in a hastily modus. Instead of refuting the remark, they would accept it, but try and explain its actuality in a defensive manner.
There is no evidence whatsoever to support what JCS just said.
A truthful individual will normally respond to this question with a question, such as, "Why are you asking me that?" or "What's going on here?" They will often protest the aggressive nature of the inquisition, or give a short and forceful response.
There is no evidence whatsoever to support what JCS just said. I think he is just making this up.
This is psychological pressure disguised as reassurance. It's not a routine procedure during the pre-test phase of a polygraph exam, yet this technique will be used when the suspect's guilt is almost conclusive.
A polygraph is not only used when a suspect's guilt is almost conclusive. Chris Watt's guilt was not almost conclusive until he confessed. A comprehensive report which took 4 years to research and took into account almost a century of academic papers came to the conclusion that the polygraph exam provides little basis for the expectation that a polygraph test could have extremely high accuracy. This is why polygraph evidence is not admissible in court, and the tests are merely used as a tool to gaslight suspects into confessing. Despite the fact that they don't work, the polygraph industry is worth $2 billion.
Wow.
The detectives here, honestly, were lucky that Chris was stupid enough to not know any of this before committing a triple homicide on his immediate family and attempting to cover it up. Fun fact, if you ever find yourself in a position where you're being administered a polygraph test by a cop or in your place of work, you can increase the chances of beating it by squeezing your asshole tight during the control questions. Thank me later.
Trauma can cause atypical behavior. Yet atypical behavior and guilty behavior are generally distinguished from each other with relative ease.
No, it's not. That's just not true.
But what's more telling is how his demeanor abruptly stops and then completely switches right before he looks in the direction of the camera.
This entire analysis is just wild conjecture. No one can diagnose a person's mental state apart from a qualified psychologist who interacts with their patient. Absolutely not a random YouTuber who's only watched one interrogation tape. JCS offers no clarification that this is all based on opinion. This is just straight up rolled off the script as if it were fact.
But how do you actually spot a liar? What skills do you require?
What the research does show, according to the most recent meta-analysis, is that your best bet of telling whether someone is lying is through information gathering interviews, which involve rapport building and active questioning between the observer and the suspect to be able to gather as much information as possible, which can later be verified or debunked by observable evidence. Giving as much information as possible is also easy for a truth teller, but imposes cognitive stress on a liar. The effects of this cognitive stress can be manipulated and exaggerated by using certain techniques, such as asking the subject to recant the story in reverse order or asking unexpected questions. This is called cognitive load theory, and it actually works. In the early 90s, the peace method of interrogation was developed in Britain by a collaboration between law enforcement and academics as a response to the amount of false confessions created by the Reid technique, which was manufactured by cops alone. It has been described as less Kojak and more Dr. Phil. A 2014 meta-study proves it's more effective at producing true confessions and protecting against false ones. It focuses on gathering information first, building rapport, and then challenging the subject cognitively, not through lying to suspects about evidence, presumption of guilt, or mental exhaustion. It has now been adopted by Australia, New Zealand, Norway, and parts of Canada. In 2019, 20 scientists got so frustrated by the copious amounts of pseudoscience dictating interrogation techniques and border control profiling methods that they got together to all sign a paper in which they tear apart limb from limb Paul Ekman, the Reid technique, synagogy in general, the dangers of pseudoscience, and why organizations so readily turn to it. It's a great read, I recommend it. But just in case you thought I'd wound this video down to a nice potential solution for all of this, just you wait, it gets worse!
Soon, AI machines will decide whether you're a criminal, so we might as well start this nuclear war right now and be done with it.
In much the same way that the US's DARPA is overly zealous about funding...
Okay, well, I don't really want to know about AI, I just want to know about body language, so I'm just going to skip to the conclusion. So I gotta...
Interest in any kind of deception detection has dramatically increased over the last few decades. It's hard to pinpoint exactly why, but living in the late stages of capitalism, it only serves as a benefit to be able to deceive others for profit and for power. And that's what's happening more and more. Yes, bitch! I found a way to blame this all on late-stage capitalism. For instance, one of the main driving factors around the hype around crypto is the supposed inability to censor information. It is built around this idea that we will have this utopia if everyone has access to the truth. But, as I've explained previously, it's just not that simple. But perhaps this will all lead to nothing and will ascend into a socialist utopia, the only remnants of neoliberalism being the embalmed, dismembered head of Thatcher on a stake displayed at the Tower of London, which, after the inevitable nuclear class war, will have been reduced to torrid ruins, seasoned by the ashes of Tory cabinet ministers. Or maybe AI capitalism will win, and humans will have to learn to adapt to their new surroundings. In much the same way we hesitate to like a picture of our friend's vegetable plot on Instagram should it feed us ads for some mobile game called Mummy's Asparagus Feet, we'll curate our facial expressions and emotions in similar ways to manipulate algorithms for our own benefit. No, eye doctor. It's not enough. I definitely need more diazepam. No, Mr. ICOP. I wasn't planning to overthrow the government. At borders, maybe we'll be placed into one of 6 threat categories based on our facial movements. Murderer, paedophile, sex robot, terrorist, jazz musician, or Noel Edmonds. Maybe a bug in the system causes everyone classed as sex robots to be the only people allowed into Latvia. Maybe Latvia will become a stateless nation ruled by horny machinery. And maybe Elon Musk will find out about iBorder Control's virtual policeman technology and incorporate it into his latest sex robot prototype to allow his billionaire mates with an oppression kink to be questioned as if they were part of the dirty proletariat in a desperate attempt to feel raw human emotion again.
Did you pack your own bags?
Yes.
Are you planning war crimes?
No.
Did your latest business venture severely impact the well-being of humankind for profit?
No. No. No.
You've been a bad boy.
What the fuck? Okay, well, thanks for joining. That was münecat. Please follow her on YouTube. Subscribe. She makes great content, great research, great researcher. And actually provided a lot of information I wanted to use. I'll probably she did say there's a lot of studies she used, so it's good to have them. It's good to have them. Little Google Doc research, so it'll be good for the video I'm gonna make. So appreciate it. Thanks for joining. Hope you like it. Hope you learned something new, and if you didn't, that's fine too. Thanks for joining. See you guys till next time. My name is still Alecato, and till next time.